Still kind of the last stage of it. It's going to be a Georgetown free project for open campus. Oh, okay, yeah, I will, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've got 529. I think you might want to.
All right.
I've got 529. We're going to start at 5:30 sharp. So you might want to be comfortable at the podium.
Okay.
Daniel? I'm not seeing anything up there. Do I want to wait until I see the clock? You want me to go by my rough?
Yeah, I think just go by yours. They're working on it. Something wrong.
Okay, I just wanted to know that are we getting C-SPAN or does that not materialize?
They're here.
Okay, just want to make sure they were ready to roll.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. Tonight we are featuring a special American Enterprise debate. The advertisement refers to it as NCAA amateurism a sham, a student-athlete reality check. Nothing like a neutral title, but the official debate question, which I think is what we'll frame here, is the NCAA promoting education and amateurism in major Division I sports programs? And if not, what ought our response to be? We have... Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Tom Miller, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a one-time sportscaster in my misspent youth when I knew what I was talking about rather than health policy. But I am volunteering tonight, and I'm not being paid anything extra by AEI to do this. No special under-the-table payments, didn't even check the betting line. We have two excellent debaters tonight, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But I do have to give you full disclosure. I did attend Duke Law School, and the only time it was put on probation in basketball when a booster provided a sports code and some travel assistance to David Thompson. We went on probation for a year. We didn't even get to recruit, and NC State won the national title a couple of years later. But I'm not sore about that, not at all. All right, our two debaters tonight. We will have Dr. John Lombardi, who is a professor of history at Louisiana State University. He has previously served in a number of academic roles: president of the LSU system, chancellor of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, president of the University of Florida, and provost of Johns Hopkins University. He's the author of dozens of books and academic articles, and he's served on many committees to advance and reform collegiate structures in athletics and the NCAA. We also have Taylor Branch. Many of you know as a Pulitzer Prize winning historian and journalist. He currently writes for The Atlantic, but many of you are familiar with his three-volume chronicle of the life of Martin Luther King Jr., called America in the King Years, among the most highly regarded works of American history. And he is also, more recently, has a book, which, if we can get that up there on the screen, is called The Cartel, which details corruption within the NCAA and what might be done to remedy it. We'll just go briefly over the basic ground rules for tonight. They should not be that complex. Actually, I should tell you that I'm pretty much not really a speaker tonight. I'm just an official. A timekeeper to enforce the rules. So let's go through some of those. The opening statements will be 8 minutes each, respectively, and if anybody goes over, We will enforce those quite seriously with infractions. The responses will be 5 minutes each, and if anyone says anything a little untoward, there'll be some penalties to be assessed afterwards. Then we'll have some Q&A from the audience. You should be able to see on the screen there, but I'll tell you as well the ways in which you can send your questions in advance to us. You can either send them by way of email, AEIdebates@aei.org, or by the more popular form of short verse by Twitter at hashtag AEIdebates. I believe that we had the coin flip beforehand in order to economize on television time and get in an extra commercial, but my understanding is that Taylor Branch won the toss. He has elected to receive, and Dr. Lombardi will be defending the goal to your right and my immediate left. And so we'll get started, and it should be a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to AEI. I'm happy to be here to engage in this discussion, to get some thought on the table about an issue that I think affects not only the governance of sport, but a growing crisis within higher education itself over governance, how we think, how we regulate a potential bubble. If you define a bubble as a disparity between benefits reaped and value created. All of higher education is headed for trouble in many respects, and I think a good way to think about it is to focus on college sports. AEI is a very appropriate place to have this debate because in one sense it could be seen as a conflict between two core conservative principles, the free market to govern how college sports works within higher education, as George Will said in complimenting my article, I was happy to see, or as was the alternative was the conservative principle is that some things are more important than the market. Traditional values, aristocracy, amateurism, that sort of thing, which was the point of view taken in the New York Times, by the New York Times editorial, that the free market makes some sense, but some values are more important, and amateurism is one of them. I'm also honored to be here with Dr. Lombardi. He's not only a fellow historian, but he's written a lot more on this issue than I have. I kind of stumbled into this by trickery on the part of the editors at the Atlantic to do a short history of college sports in America. And so this is definitely a sideline for me. He is president of university, and of course he was a provost at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where I live, so I have to honor him for that. Plus he's ranked number 3 in the college football polls at LSU, so he knows what he's talking about, and he has practical experience. I have none. He's a reformer within the world of college sports. Specifically, Dr. Lombardi has recently advocated that the scholarship levels for athletes be raised, which is anathema to a lot of the smaller schools that feel they can't afford it. He has also, more significantly in my view, advocated that scholarships be guaranteed for athletes for their entire 4 years, which is even more anathema to big-time coaches such as his own coach at LSU, who want the year-by-year scholarship rule to give them more control over the athletes. And finally, he is also an advocate of reform in NCAA rules that capture income from the sale of sports memorabilia and films and everything for an athlete's entire lifetime, long after they leave school. That is the issue in the O'Bannon antitrust case that's working its way through the courts right now. And he's a reformer on that as well, all of which would cause havoc within the world of college sports. And I admire him for that. But he says every reform needs to be done within the bedrock principle of amateurism. And I don't want to mince words about it. There are lots of things in reform of college sports about the governance of sports and how they should be done and the balance and what the faculty should do and so forth. And we can agree on all of those, but I'm here to say that unless we at least think about amateurism and what it means and where it comes from, all of the talk about college reform is wasted breath. Amateurism in my view, is a bogus conceit that can only exist in sports because it has a long history and because, quite frankly, part of the purpose of sports is that we don't have to think too hard. The whole purpose of sports is to cheer and boo, and that's what we do. And we have contempt and admiration for these athletes, and we tell them to shut up and do whatever they want, and we recoil reflexively from the notion of amateurism without thinking how unique, how weird, quite frankly, it is in our society to impose amateurism without consent on one segment of our population. Not all students, but only the students who are playing sports. And I contend that until we think about that and can state a rationale for it, we can't even begin to have a productive conversation about sports reform, let alone higher education reform. Dr. Lombardi says in one of his papers that the principle of amateurism is easy. If we sell student performances as part of the university-based sanctioned package of college sports, it's okay. If the student sells her athletic abilities outside of university-based and sanctioned packages, it is not okay. Now, he calls that a principle. I think that it's a distinction, but it's far short of a principle. It states no rationale, no foundation, no authority. Where did this come from? When you try to get to the authority, when you poke at all into the authority of college sports, you get circular arguments or reflexive arguments. Famously, in Sports Illustrated, Michael Rosenberg told of interviewing Miles Brand, the former president of the NCAA, and having the most circular interview of his whole career. They can't be paid, meaning the athletes. Why? Asked Rosenberg. Because they're amateurs, said Brand. What makes them amateurs? Well, they can't be paid. Why not? Because they're amateurs. Who decided they are amateurs? We did. Why? Because we don't pay them. Now, this goes round and round and round. It's not based on anything except history and privilege. The principle of amateurism, and this is a quote, is an avocation. This is in the NCAA's Division I Manual and Rules. The principle of amateurism is an avocation, and student athletes should be protected from exploitation by professional and commercial enterprises. Now, that may roll off your mind and into your consciousness easily, but surely it's a little bit odd to say that it exploits somebody to pay them rather than not to pay them. This is Alice in Wonderland notion that you are exploiting athletes if they receive any tangible benefit from the value that they sacrifice and work hard to create with extraordinary talent and effort. The whole world is upside down. It is an Alice in Wonderland world in calling these athletes amateurs. If colleges wanted to be consistent, they would say that all students are amateurs, that graduate students can't be paid for being teaching assistants, that students can't work in the campus bookstore, can't be cashiers, can't moonlight the way we admire them, can't take part in work-study programs, can't do any of that, can't start a small business the way we admire students who start a small business to pay their way through college, can't start Facebook and become a billionaire when they're at Harvard. We would never dream of applying those rules to students at large, only to this one small group of athletes. And you couldn't write a law, you couldn't go into a legislature to do this in any school in the world, in any state in the world, for good reason. It's illogical. It'd be thrown out of court. You'd be laughed at. You can't specify this, but the NCAA not only says they can't receive any tangible benefit, but that their relatives can't. Their mother can't get a Christmas card from a sports agent. It exercises and assumes a level of social control exercised only in North Korea over these students. So amateurism is a sham. It is an unexamined principle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that clear, straightforward, nuanced version of what goes on in intercollegiate athletics. Now, let me first say something that is perhaps kind of academic, being a professor and all. First thing is that this notion that the NCAA and in intercollegiate athletics as a cartel is a problem for all of us because it makes us think the wrong way about the enterprise. If this were a cartel, it would surely be the worst cartel in America because 95% of them lose money. So it isn't a very good cartel as cartel go. But it isn't a cartel. What it is a franchising organization. The NCAA is an organization that the universities invented in order to be able to create a standardized product called intercollegiate athletics that has standardized rules, standardized operations, standardized activities, so that all the universities who participate in the franchise, like McDonald's, can have the same standardized product. The difference with McDonald's is that in the standardized product of the franchise, while we all have the same rules and we all have the same stuff to do, the football field's the same everywhere, the rules are the same everywhere, it's all the same, we get to label it any way we want. We can put our name on it, we can label it anywhere we want, we can promote it, we can sell it to our fans and friends, we can do anything we want with the name, but the product is a standardized franchise product. And so what the NCAA's assignment is from the universities is to maintain that standardized product so that we can all participate in this common endeavor. So that whether we're looking at a big program like Ohio State or Texas is in the $140 million business, or we're looking at a small program running somewhere around $23, $24 million, they're all playing the same games because they have the same standardized frame of reference. Now this is a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult because we invented this franchising system when there weren't very many universities and they weren't very far apart in their scale and size. Now, over the last 100 and some odd years, 120 years, what's happened is that the higher education business has boomed and exploded and expanded, and so the franchise business has had to rearrange the rules of how we do franchising to try and match these dramatic changes in higher education. So eventually we divided up into divisions, and eventually we had Division 1A, we had Division 1AA, we renamed them to try to disguise it, but it's still, to you and me old people, at least 1A, 1AA, 1AAA, and so on. We have Division 2, which is relatively small, we have Division 3, which is big, and so now we have different levels of franchising operation, but we still have the franchise. Now the challenge of intercollegiate sports since day one, has been that the people who like sports want to win. Now, I mean, this is fundamental. They want to win. And the other thing about people who want to win is, as you may have observed when you watch the financial markets, when you watch banking, when you watch the securities business, people in America who want to win are willing to cheat in order to win. They are willing to do anything they can to win because they want to win. And so what the franchise operation does is try to create standards and structures that reduce the amount of cheating that goes on down to a level that permits fair competition to take place so that you and everybody else who watches these competitions can feel like they're being won on some kind of a general basis of fairness. And I challenge anybody to find another voluntary organization of a big enterprise in America that has a better record of trying to maintain these kind of fair structures. It's certainly not the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a big failure. It's certainly not the regulation of the banking industry, which has collapsed under other kinds of scandals after another. It's not the American Bar Association. It's not the American Medical Association. We're doing pretty well, I want to tell you. Now, let me say something else. It's true that we have a big struggle maintaining what is amateurism. There's no question Taylor's right. It's hard to maintain the amateur focus because everybody wants to make a buck off these students. Everybody wants to make a buck off these big-time student athletes. The trouble is, the big-time student athletes are a very tiny fraction of our franchise. Now, very few. 155 people go out into the pros maybe are drafted every year from the football enterprise. It's tiny. It's tiny. We got 430 student athletes in the franchise. 430,000 student athletes in the franchise. That's a lot of kids who are playing in a franchise. Now, we believe in this stuff, but it's very hard to manage. And what you watch when you watch the evolution of the NCAA and the franchise that the universities have assigned to that organization, and don't forget, this is all about the universities. The universities own the franchise. So whatever is done because the universities, their presidents, their trustees, their faculty, their staff, their regulatory agencies, everybody is in favor of what's going on. Okay? Right? Ain't nobody opting out. Nobody's opting out. You know, see people raising their hands, you know, they go to the night commission and they get filled with wisdom and justice and truth, and they go home and they say, we're not going to play anymore. No, they don't do that. They say we have wisdom, justice, and truth, but everybody needs to have wisdom and justice and truth, just like us. so that we don't have an unfair competition. So then we adjust the rules of the franchise to try to make it work out. Now, what should we do about the professional pressures on big-time student athletes? Well, the first thing we should do is we should allow any student athlete who wants to go pro to go pro. Right? Why do we wait? Why do we restrict them? Why do we slow it down? Send them out. Right? They want to leave high school and go pro in basketball. What's it our business to interfere in that choice? Congratulations. Go. Explore. Do the best you can. Right? Go out and be a pro. It's okay with me. Make $1 gazillion. I'm happy for you. I think you should do it. Football's tougher. Out of high school, they're not competitive. Right? There are very few high school football players who are competitive into pros. So they come to us. And what do we end up doing? We end up running a little bit of a minor league operation here, because football doesn't want to do a minor league operation. Right? They don't want to do the minor league operation, so we do it for them. And we try to maintain academic standards. We try to give these kids a chance because we know so few of them will go pro. You look at the numbers, practically none of them go pro. The chances of going pro and making a career in professional football is teensy tiny compared to the number of student athletes. So we do our best. We try to get them through college. We have all kinds of support structures for them. Most of them don't go pro. Most of them make reasonable progress, and when they're not making progress, we've instituted rules and regulations to try to increase that focus on academics, and we've been reasonably successful given the way the enterprise is set up. But I'd be all for making a minor league in football and sending them all over there, but football isn't interested in that. Now baseball, which has a minor league, right? Large numbers of our students, as soon as they get recruited, they're gone. They go into the professional leagues. Congratulations. They go to the minor league. And they play minor league ball for a while. They don't play for us. They play minor league ball. Congratulations. You want to be a pro, go out and do that. Right? You want to go to the stock market, right? Get a license. Go out and sell stock, make money. I'm in favor of all that for students. I just ran out of time ahead of you. Beat you, didn't I?
So 5 minutes? Thank you. I would say that one model for a competitive enterprise that manages intense competition in athletics without disenfranchising the very people who create the value is the Olympics. The International Olympics used to consider college sports hopelessly prostituted because they allowed scholarships, which is already professional, whereas the Olympics banned it and said, and that was when there was tremendous conflict between the AAU and the NCAA. The Olympics expunged the word amateur from its bylaws shortly after the 1978 law in the United States that required athletes to be on every governing committee for the 39 Olympic sport committees. And nobody could look across the table and tell those athletes that they should be on food stamps because they'd be banished for life like Jesse Owens if they got a nickel for competing in these sports and devoting their lives to it. So there are models. Franchise is a nice notion, but the NCAA is a cartel in the sense that it has artificial rules agreed to by the schools to penalize anybody, any athlete who receives and any university who grants one nickel above the agreed stipend, which is a scholarship rule. That is enormously significant. Yes, it's true. Only 1% of the college athletes ever go pro. But the flip side of that is that 99% of the athletes who've been devoting their lives to these sports and their bodies and are all beat up, the college experience when they are generating money for Clemson or Purdue is the only opportunity in their whole lifetime to get a nest egg out of the value that they're creating. And it is enormous. For 1 month to run March Madness, CBS Turner Sports pays the NCAA directly $771 million just for running that tournament, out of which it pays all the teams that participate in the tournament, and it subsidizes 1,200 schools with what's left over after the NCAA takes its own cut, which is why there are construction cranes in Indianapolis today and fleets of private airplanes. All this is because the athletes themselves don't get any of that money. The NCAA was terrified in the 1990s when there were rumors that one team might refuse to walk out on the court with national obsession, just a small strike, even for 10 minutes, with all the networks there, with $771 million at stake. This is generated by the rules of the NCAA that say that the students have no stake in their own enterprise. They cannot be members of the NCAA. They have no voice. They can't vote. They have no rights. The structure is fundamentally unbalanced. It's unbalanced even in practical ways. look at it this way. For 1,100 out of the 1,200 NCAA schools, it wouldn't matter a particle if you said amateurism is bogus. We will no longer demonize students who ask for compensation for what they do. I'm not saying every student should be paid. I don't believe they should. But I don't think they should be demonized for asking for compensation if they're producing enormous value either. Right now, 1,100 schools support amateurism rules that really benefit only the NCAA itself and the big-time sports schools like LSU that get to keep the money among the adults, hire more strength and conditioning coaches, and so on and so forth, and then have the gall to say that we're doing it for your own good so that you can enjoy the blessings of amateurism. That's how it works. It's balanced. It's imbalanced structurally. All the NCAA's money comes from basketball. None comes from football, because in 1984 the football schools went to the Supreme Court and said it's un-American. It's a cartel. The court ruled it was a cartel and struck down the NCAA rules that hitherto the NCAA had licensed all football broadcasts the same way it licenses all of March Madness. And that was gone. So it's unbalanced on its face. They're struggling. That's what this National Football Playoff is all about. And believe me, the NCAA is terrified that if this playoff works, the conferences could say we can run March Madness without running the $771 million through the NCAA. There are tremendous practical problems, but they're also, underneath all of that, they're basic problems of principle, which is that the athletes are excluded. And you can see it in the Penn State penalties that went down with everybody saying the Penn State got whacked hard. But logically and in balance, those penalties would have said Penn State needs to have 20 fewer assistant coaches, 20 fewer assistants to the president, 20 fewer assistants to the athletic director, all the people who failed and abetted and enabled those crimes. Instead, who did it penalize? 20 fewer scholarships for people who are still in high school and had nothing to do with it. That's because the NCAA concentrates all the power in precisely those offices that committed these crimes.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to pay attention to is this notion that the poor, struggling student athlete. Now, I know, we're supposed to feel sorry for people who are given a full scholarship ride, who have nothing but academic support, who receive all of the equipment and travel and support and health support, training support that is available to anybody in the Western world, and puts them on a stage where they can display their talent in such a way that it increases, especially in football, their value when they decide to go into the draft, which they can do at any time. Nobody stops them from going into the draft. They want to go into the draft after the first 2 years. Congratulations. I let them go into the draft after the first week myself, but I'm not in charge of that, but that's where I'd be. So I don't feel too sorry for the student athletes. When I talk to my students in my class on intercollegiate sports in America, and we talk about the way in which it's structured, the support structure for student athletes, I say, what do you think about that? I say, what do you think about this structure that you get for being a participant in a extracurricular activity? What do you think about that? Well, they all think it's a pretty damn good deal, and they wish they had it. They wish they had the same deal that the student athletes have, because it's a very, very good deal. Now, sure, we could pay them. It's fine. We're already paying them, right? We could just increase the amount. But you have to figure out how we're going to pay them. Right? How are we going to pay these student athletes? I think what we ought to do is pay somebody like Tim Tebow $5 million a year, and nobody else anything. I think that's reasonable. You got all the TV coverage. I think that's the way we ought to deal with our students. Well, I don't think that's the appropriate thing to do in a university. I think what we try to do is run the university with reasonable amount of fairness as best we can. We try to support the costs of what it is we do. This is not a simple business. It's an expensive business. All of these programs, except for, a few, like maybe 20 at most in the Division 1A, are losing money. And they're losing money because they're supporting the sports that are not on television, because they're supporting all kinds of sports, track and field, the Olympic sports. They're supporting golf. They're supporting tennis. They're supporting all this stuff. Okay? Now, we can say that we don't like the way the system is organized because it transfers money It transfers money from the big money sports to the no money sports. That's what it does, right? It's a transfer process. This is something we do in America, right? It's like a graduated income tax. We're well into that, and I know the American Enterprise Institute probably thinks that's a bad idea. But nonetheless, here in intercollegiate sports, that's what we do. We transfer money from the people who are making it to be able to support the people who aren't making it, because the franchise business is organized around a program. All right, the concept of intercollegiate athletics, which differs from pro games, is that we support a program which has a defined number of sports. You have to have all of the sports to participate in the franchise. And that means you can't put all your money on football. You can't put all your money on basketball. You can't put all your money on whatever your big-time sport is. You have to support them all. And the level of support that you have to provide is part of this process of trying to create these programs that support the extracurricular activity of these students. Now, they're getting off a pretty good deal. I mean, I know I should feel sorry for them. I don't feel sorry for them. I got to tell you the truth, I don't feel sorry for them. I look at what an honor student gets. You got an honor student in a university. First of all, they don't get as good a scholarship. Second of all, they don't get a 4-year scholarship. If they don't make a B average, they lose their honor scholarship. Just like a football player who doesn't play anymore, he loses his scholarship. Okay? So, yeah, I mean, maybe they should get a 4-year scholarship for honor students, even if they're getting a D-. What do I know? Okay? I'm not in favor of that, but some people might be in favor of that. Well, you know, 4-year scholarship for student athlete, considering the risk and all the rest of it, I don't have any problem with that. It isn't going to hurt the sports program. It's going to hurt the rest of the university that's going to have to pick up the cost. The sports program won't pick up the cost. It'll be picked up someplace else in the university. And yeah, we could make it better, right? We could say we really don't want to have this competition the way it is. We don't want it to be fair. We don't want to try to maintain an amateurism. We don't want to try and have our student athletes actually be students. We don't want to try to keep them in class. We don't have to try to keep them eligible. We could say we don't need to do that, because that's what we want to do if we're going to pay them only for performance. No, we provide support so they can play, and so that they can participate in the intellectual activity of the university. Graduation rate for student athletes is pretty good compared to the rest of the student population. Could it be better? Sure, it could be better. Right? But over the years, what has the NCAA done? The franchise has increasingly increased the amount of academic content that is required of a program to stay alive in the big time in the NCAA. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for this argument. I mean, I think, sure, I think there's something to be said for the lawsuit about the people who are using their images in the future. That's a conversation we probably ought to have. But otherwise, I think we're probably doing about as well as we can at the moment. But I think the enterprise has to continue to get better every single year. It has to keep responding to the changes that are taking place in the environment. And finally, let me say, any of you who watch intercollegiate sports on television, you are the cause of all of this money.
Well, that's quite an opening round in response. We have some questions from our audience coming in both by email and by Twitter. I think given that we've got about 20 minutes, we probably won't be taking any more than the ones I've already digested. And one of the questions was just asking the basic issue, framing it that Dr. Lombardi was to some extent, but in a little different sense. Given how much that universities are under fiscal pressure, making ends meet of a pretty expensive enterprise if you're paying tuition bills, as I have recently, how realistic is reform of what is one of the more positive money-making, revenue-generating sources of the college within the limits of the bottom line?
Well, look, I can't seem to get this through anybody's head, right? Hardly anybody makes any money from intercollegiate sports.
Most.
So we don't do intercollegiate sports to make money. We make money so we can do as much intercollegiate sports as we possibly can. And so, yeah, there are 22 programs out of 1,100 that make some money. Right? The rest of them are losing their shirts in varying degrees. Now, the percentage by which they are losing their shirts hasn't changed a whole lot as a percentage of the university's budget over the years. You know, on the average and a median, it runs at about 5%. It stayed at about 5% over this period. But I got to tell you, the idea that we do sports to make money is just like saying we do research to make money. Both of them lose money, and we do them for other reasons. But the reason we do them is not to make money. Now, we want to make as much money as possible from intercollegiate sports to subsidize the deficit and make the deficit less than it would otherwise be. But there ain't no way that we're going to make a profit on intercollegiate sports and solve the budgetary problems that most universities are going through. Quite the contrary. As we lose more and more money in intercollegiate sports, it's going to put more and more pressure on the universities to try and do something about the cost structure of intercollegiate sports.
The flip side of that question for you, Taylor, from the same source is basically, if there's not that revenue gusher from the major sports, or is being paid to the players, so there's no longer the revenue transfer, what happens to the rest of the college sports program without that ride and that subsidy?
You confront that question honestly and straightforwardly with all the stakeholders having a say in it, rather than the way it's done now, which is by fiat and ledger domain. What it does is it creates what we have now is kind of a casino mentality, where this money comes in from the big revenue sports, and the softball coach comes in and says, you get all this money, I want part of it. So you have $300,000 softball coaches. It lifts everything, but it's all artificial, it's all phony, and it's all off the backs of the revenue athletes without their consent.
Dr. Lombardi talked about one alternative which you didn't want to sign on to, which is basically pay the superstars a lot of money and no one else gets anything. It would almost like having a franchise player, which we have in the NFL with free agents. But what's the alternative structure for compensation in terms of what Taylor might think about? We're going to have collective bargaining? Would we have a minimum salary within the players, and then people could get bonuses if they did special things? What would be an alternative structure where suddenly some of the money came back to those performing on the field?
The alternative structure is simple. You say amateurism no longer exists, and everybody has to deal with the consequences openly. Athletes can come in. The volleyball players can come in and say, I want $10,000 above my scholarship, and the university's free to laugh. But the system would otherwise evolve naturally. The way it is now, everybody presumes that we have to be satisfied that the system is fair before we give rights to the people who are producing all the value and risking their lives. It doesn't make any sense. The change is simple. Acknowledge that amateurism is bogus. It has been grafted on from the 19th century, when amateurism meant we're all gentlemen and we won't allow anybody from the working trades to participate in the Olympics. And when TV money started generating millions, we grafted that amateurism on as an excuse to control the system and essentially say, we colleges cannot afford not to rob these athletes. And that's basically what it boils down to. That's why I can't get anybody to say what is the foundational justification for imposing amateurism on people without their consent.
Dr. Lombardi seemed to suggest that the NCAA is really, in college athletics, only exploiting a few. Maybe the superstars who could make more money, and that benefits others. Or, Taylor, you seem to be saying you're exploiting quite a lot of the athletes. Who's being exploited and what basis?
I don't think that's true. I don't think that we're in the business of exploiting anybody. I think we're in the business of providing opportunities for a lot of people that they would not otherwise have if they didn't turn pro. Okay. And I'm in favor, as I keep saying over and over again, people want to be professionals, they should be professionals. We're trying to have students who participate in an intercollegiate activity and an extracurricular intercollegiate athletics. And we support it. We provide all kinds of activity that allows it. The TV revenue has allowed us to increase the quality of the support we provide to all student athletes. And yeah, we could say that we ought to pay people for their quality and put them in the open marketplace, but we've invented the NCAA in the first place because that's what was going on. That kind of stuff was going on. People were buying, selling student athletes. They were busy trading people back and forth. They had ringers playing the games. We had all kinds of bad stuff going on. And so over the years, the institutions, through their franchise of the NCAA, have gradually put in place, responding to each crisis and each problem and each issue, mechanisms to try to sustain the quality and the fairness and the even structure of intercollegiate sports. Now, it may be that there's going to be too much money along the way. It may be that the big-time football programs are going to break the bank. There was various times in the history of the NCAA when it looked as if the big-time football programs were going to break it. They were going to break the place and go independent because they could. There's no question at all. The SEC tomorrow decided, hey, we're going to run our own NCAA. We don't need you guys. Why should we support all these second-rate teams out there? Why should we help them survive? Why should we maintain rules that don't allow us to use our financial power to drive ourselves into the media marketplace and make $1 gazillion? But you want to wonder why they don't do that. They don't do that for two reasons. The first reason they don't do that is that the NCAA and all of the participants, all 1,000 of the participants, continually revise the structure to try and accommodate the different levels of play that are involved in the NCAA. The second thing is that the big-time programs know that the minute they split off and go pro, right, they become a minor league. They become a minor professional league. And everybody knows that a minor professional league sucks. Okay? It's bad stuff. It is bad stuff. It may pay the players a little more, but it is bad stuff. Right? How many of you people go and watch minor league baseball? Okay? Lots of you. I'm sure you're all out there watching minor league baseball. That's why that's such a big TV audience, okay? Why are so many people out there watching minor league stuff? They're not. Nobody wants to watch arena football. Give me a break. So what we have is we have a product that has high value that we try and use to spread the benefit of the enthusiasm for the big money sports to as many students as possible, as many programs as possible, as many institutions as possible. Now, if you don't want to play in this franchise, all you have to do is join the NAIA. There is no requirement to stay in the NCAA. Nobody is forced to stay in the NCAA. So if you think that amateur handing holds, singing songs, and playing frisbee and stuff is what the hell you want to do, go join the NAIA.
I'm sorry. I heard a lot of condescension toward student athletes and toward the college athletes in that. The courts have ruled that these are effective monopolies, that the NCAA, otherwise you wouldn't have these rules. Otherwise you wouldn't be generating $771 million. These sports are popular not because everybody believes that they're amateurs. That's what people said, that the Olympics would dry up when it dropped amateurism, and it didn't. People barely noticed. They are popular because they are connected to tradition. They are young people. They're connected to your school, and they are producing an amazingly non-amateurish, wonderful product out there that captivates people. The notion of student athlete is a fiction created by the NCAA by its own admission to beat workman's compensation cases in court. It's kind of a neither here nor there, neither student nor athlete. Anybody, and NCAA people repeat that phrase 5 times per sentence because it's their jurisdiction. But what we should see is it's not that complicated. Just like ending amateurism, which is the whole basis of the NCAA's fortune and power and the whole basis of all of our contempt for the dirty athlete. Get rid of that, say they're entitled just as much as you and I to seek compensation for what we do well. Students who play sports in college at a high level are students and athletes. They're just like any other two-career person. They should, if they are functioning well in both spheres, the university is responsible for making them bona fide athletes, and many universities don't do a very good job. The NCAA actually performs well in that regard on the academic side. They're also athletes. They work 40, 60 hours a week as athletes. They have to work as students, and a lot of them aren't that well endowed academically. So for the ones that perform as students and athletes, they deserve enormous respect beyond even the accolades that they get on the field. What we give them is boos and whispers and a little condescension. Shut up, you're lucky to get your scholarship. To me, it is fundamentally wrong, and it's un-American.
We've been almost debating 2 topics. One is, should there be amateurs? Can there be amateurs, pro versus amateur? And then there's this other debate as to what do we think of the NCAA? Could we have amateurism without the NCAA as it's currently structured, or the two intertwined, and maybe that's the problem of supporting both of them at the same time?
That's the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to see if it's possible to have students who are athletes operating in a highly competitive, standardized environment. And the answer may be it's not possible. It may be that there's so much money it will swamp us out. It may be that the pressure of television and media and all that other stuff will eventually break the bank. That may certainly happen. The NCAA has been through the universities with their franchising group has been through subsequent crises, one after another, trying to adjust to changes in the way in which the marketplace for all of these activities is managed and structured. Right? We had to learn how to deal with women. We had to learn how to deal with minorities. We had to learn how to deal with all kinds of people that we didn't used to have to deal with. Right? This idea of the intercollegiate sports was invented by elite white guys. Okay, and there's a lot of elite white guys left. Right, who's up here? A bunch of 3 old white guys. Okay, I mean, what can I tell you? So intercollegiate sports was invented by elite white guys, and over the years, what have they done? Over the years, they have had to move with what the country wanted from its universities and their sports programs to get more diverse, to have, and introduce women, and they fought it, as you all know. Those of you who have followed Title IX know that universities and everybody dug in and said, no, we don't want it. It's the end of the world as we know it, you know. and football will die, the world will end. Well, the world didn't actually end. What happened is we got a whole bunch of high-powered women student athletes. So that who would have believed in 1972 that we would have ended up here now with 43% of our student athletes women? Now, not 50-50 yet, okay, but 43%, that's spectacular. And if you look at what's going on in the high schools and you're looking in the secondary schools, it's the result of this opportunity that the universities invented under pressure and being forced and all that good stuff. They didn't do it out of the goodness of their hearts, but they did it. And the result is that this enterprise that we don't like, this enterprise generated the revenue that made it possible to support all those women's sports. And so, I mean, I'd be happy to see another model put on the table that would be functional. But you turn people loose in the marketplace, you're going to get an operation that's worse than what we have now. And I think it would break the bank. I think it would break the institutions, and that might be a good thing. That may be the goal of the enterprise, is to see if we can break the relationship between higher education and intercollegiate athletics. But I think it would be a big loss because everybody pays attention to that top level of people who are on TV all the time. They say, oh, poor people, they can't possibly be okay. And you look at what we invest for those people to be on television. When you look at what the university puts in to make possible these incredible platforms on which these student athletes are able to project their skills and their abilities so they can increase their value when they go pro. I mean, we're doing our part. And depending how you calculate it, it can be anywhere from $70,000 to $120,000 a year of value delivered to the intercollegiate athlete who's in the big time with all of that support that's provided. But the real key is it allows the program to succeed. Those 23 sports that the NCAA sponsors, that program is the key to the success of this enterprise. And the day you say there's one part of that program that's going to operate in the professional market-driven mode and another part of the program that's not, you're going to have a different business. Now, you may like that business better, and that's okay, but I won't like the business better.
Taylor, someone's coming after you. They thought on a question, but I'm going to rephrase it. And I have to say, with a disclaimer, I didn't come up with this question. They said, as a UNC graduate, how do you feel about the what was declared the greatest academic scandal in NCAA history? This is mostly flowing, I think, out of the football program where there were sanctions, but also the dilution of the academic standards. How do we see that happening in some of these big college programs where it looks like they're being educated, but they're not being educated?
Well, I feel terrible as a Tar Heel that it happened, and I'm praying that it doesn't seep into the basketball program before this year. But I think that it is a fairy tale if we think that most big-time sports programs don't operate the same way. I've taught at colleges, and professors I know say I've had no students in my athletes in my classes since I told the athletic department I wouldn't give them heads up on what the grades are. Then I'm off the list for the approved. The function of the athletic department is to steer kids into courses that can keep them eligible. That's why, to me, the notion that the NCAA is in charge of the student athlete and that that's a solution is so false. The university unambiguously should be in charge of whether the student is a bona fide student. They've forfeited a lot of that role. The coaches can decide whether they can play. They are two separate roles. It's already separated, Dr. Lombardi. We have a commercialized, highly monetarized system, and its only distinction is that it excludes value, by and large, artificially, by artificial rules, from the people who really create it. You can't have it both ways and say that this is empowering and enriching the ones who are going pro and then turn around and say only 1% of them are going pro. All of these athletes are generating value. The guards, the interior linemen are generating value in these big games. And they're all being treated the same, and they're all being invited since the third string punter gets a scholarship just like Tim Tebow, and they see all this money around them, and they are encouraged to fantasize that they'll both be worth the same thing in the NFL, and that's because the NCAA system does not give them any realistic education on how this enormous money machine fits into the University of Pure Learning. And the first thing that you have to do that is to be honest and to give them their rights.
Taylor's written a lot about the exploitation of the other revenue sources, the commercialization of images, and ways in which the universities will profit for decades after the fact, whereas the players are long since gone. in our economic analysis, we sometimes look at other type of market mechanisms which might be able to change these incentives around. What about deferred comp for the players, so that they're not tainted while they're playing, but perhaps if it turns out they've got a revenue gusher because they're on a championship team, they get a little bit back in the backside?
Well, anytime you start playing people, whether you pay them ahead or behind or up or down or over and under, they're getting paid, and they're not stupid. These are smart people. I think the issue of the images, though, is a very complicated and important question. We have, in our effort to try and maintain the separation of the intercollegiate sports enterprise and the commercial enterprise, we have a very hard time succeeding with that, in part because of the enormous media attention that's provided, which generates all this stuff. So we have some rules that are very difficult to take seriously. So we have one rule that says, you can't commercialize the name of a student athlete while they're a student athlete, okay? So when you buy a sweatshirt with his number on it. Now, who are we fooling? Okay, who are we fooling? When you sell a sweatshirt with Tim Tebow's number on it in the University of Florida, you think they don't know who the hell that represents? Of course, it represents Tim Tebow, which is fine. But it's a very difficult conversation. Now, I think that there is a model that could be invented to try and deal with this. Let me give you an example. We produce in a top flight university something like $114 million a year in intellectual property returns on licenses and patents and then royalties and that kind of thing, right? That's another business of the university. And that's a college business. And so the graduate students and the postdocs who are in that business are not paid based on how much money that will be generated. They're all paid a flat rate. They're paid however much the grant provides, and it's a crappy amount of money. They'd like to have the deal that student athletes have, but that's another issue. And so they participate in that thing. They make it possible for us to produce this tremendous scientific output, and somewhere down the line, maybe it'll make $1 gazillion, but we don't know for sure. Just like the student athlete who starts out at the University of Florida, he doesn't know when he goes out for his first game whether he's going to end up with a big-time pro contract with $1 gazillion. He may not work out for him, may not be up to the speed. A lot of them don't make it. So you have to try to pay attention to how you do that. So you might say, okay, that when we have a lot of money on an image, right, whether it's EA Sports or somebody else is using it, then there might be a way to pay after they stop being student athletes. Okay? Not buy ahead of time, not give them an advance, none of that stuff. But after they become student athletes and you're still using their image, seems to me we ought to share the money between the university and the student athlete, just as we do for some kind of a license agreement. So we have a license agreement and you participate in the project. The university has elaborate rules about who all those who participate in the scientific activity, when it makes it big, how do we distribute the license money? Who gets this part, who gets that part, who gets the other part? We could invent something like that for intercollegiate sports if it becomes a serious issue. And I think we probably ought to pay attention to that kind of a conversation.
Okay, just no discount tattoos, right? We've tried that before.
Yeah.
Okay. We're coming up on our closing statement, so I'm going to exit briefly. You have 5 minutes apiece to wrap up. Taylor first, and then Dr. Lombardi.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. This is a very complicated topic, as I guess you can see, and it's burdened with a lot of history and a lot of reflex actions. And the hard part for me was to get past the notion that everybody that I've ever talked to outside of the college athletic locker room feels that presumes that we should have a say in how this thing should be structured before debating what the primary role of the people who are actually producing this value is. We presume to settle questions of their rights. And by and large, we bounce off of those questions. And that, to me, is scary. As an echo, as a civil rights historian, as a racial historian, for colonialism, in which the colonialists insisted that they were doing all of this with only the best intentions for the native populations that they were helping along. And even for slavery. I got in a lot of trouble on Stephen Colbert, who asked me if college athletes were slaves and everything. Of course not. College athletes are not. They are, in some ways, as Dr. Lombardi says, privileged. They have the opportunity to do this. But it's also true that nobody wants to state the principle by which their rights are uniquely abridged in our society. We bounce off of that. And that, to me, is an echo of slavery. because nobody wanted to deal with the abolitionists even up into the Civil War, not because we thought the abolitionists were wrong, but because we were afraid the abolitionists were right. They were asking, what's the justification for this system? And let's do something about it. Let's start with what the basic rights are. I have a 3-point reform agenda that I think will apply to the future of troubled higher education as well as sports. I'm not going to read it here, but it's my last bit. If you're interested, I bought all of these cards. Transparency and balance. Transparency is a big problem for actual information. I can't tell you how many college presidents I've talked to don't really have information and tell me that they don't have accurate information on all the sub rosa contracts and promotional things that are going on in the athletic department. But transparency should get all the stakeholders, including the faculty and everybody involved in governance. Can we balance, second principle, the academic mission with intercollegiate sports at a high level? How are we going to do that? We need to get all the stakeholders at the table. The system needs to be open, transparent. Maybe you can't do it, as Dr. Lombardi says, but at least it should be open. But third, and the only one I'm going to read, is equity, because I'm saying if you don't deal with equity and you don't deal with it freshly, all the rest of it is wasted breath, and you're just waiting for the courts or some big fight or some collapse to change the system exogenously without dealing with the principle. But to me, equity is the important one. Colleges and universities shall respect the basic rights of all students, applied consistently to athletes and non-athletes alike. On campus, as under the law, adult students retain the full attributes of citizenship. These include the rights and duties of informed consent, equal opportunity, representative government, and due process. No freedom shall be abridged because of athletic status. To meet practical needs and aspirations, all students are eligible to seek fair compensation in full or part-time jobs, entrepreneurial ventures, teaching appointments, work-study programs, and all other legitimate enterprise, whether for or separate from their school. Now tell me on what basis you object to that, and you can build the NCAA on the backs of athletes whose rights are uniquely abridged in a system that is hidden and sub rosa and is festering along with the other problems in higher education, because the place that's supposed to have brave thought does everything by assumption, and that's the very thing that it lacks. Confront the basic definitions. That's where governance and reform starts. Thank you.
Okay, I think there's a misconception perhaps out there that somehow there's some secret stuff going on, and there may be. Most of the secret stuff goes on in private universities because we can't see what they do. But for any of the big public universities involved in intercollegiate athletics, everything they do is available under public information, and the newspapers are good at that. Stuff that I don't have, they can get, so they get it and they give it to me. Secondly, the NCAA provides an extraordinary amount of information to the universities that are part of its enterprise, an extraordinary amount of information. Now, it may be that the presidents don't pay attention. It may be the presidents don't watch. And maybe they don't want to know. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't pay attention to the information that's available. But for those who are interested in the information, who want to know where the money is, who want to know who's getting paid what, who want to know how the institutions rank in terms of what they spend, who want to know what the deficits are, where they're generated, if they want to know what the money's spent on, if they want to know where the money comes from, all of that is detailed in enormous detail for all of those who are interested in it. Secondly, the NCAA is not a secret enterprise. The NCAA is run by the university presidents. The NCAA is run by the university presidents, and they bring in athletic directors and coaches and other people to provide advice and counsel, especially on the rules and regulations of the game. But the main rules of how the thing operates is done by the university presidents. Now, if the university presidents and their trustees and their regulatory agencies and their faculty are willing to change the enterprise, all they got to do is change it. All they have to do is change it. And every change that has happened in the NCAA over the last 110 years has been driven by the presidents deciding that the time has come to do something different in a different way. So the idea that you can attack the NCAA and somehow fix this misses the point. He's got a good point. The point is that it's a higher education problem. It's not an NCAA problem. We own the NCAA. We are the NCAA. The universities do the NCAA. The rules are passed by the presidents. Right? They're the ones that make the decisions. And you say, well, the conferences are important. The conferences are run by the presidents. The SEC is run by the presidents. And if the presidents don't want to do something, then it doesn't happen. So when we say, why don't the presidents get involved, I'll tell you why they don't get involved. Number one, their trustees don't want them to get involved. Now, people who own the university, the trustees, the legislature, those people, they don't want them to change it very much. Number two, the constituencies of the universities, the fans, the alumni, the friends, they don't want us to fix it. They don't want us to change what the universities do. And so when you say, well, we ought to get out there and make the NCAA fix all this, no, you got the wrong target. You got the wrong target. The enemy is us. Right? The enemy is us. It is us, the universities. It is us, the fans. It is us, all of you who watch it on television. It is us, all of you who buy tickets at outrageous prices. It's us, all of the people who buy skyboxes. You are the people who make the enterprise what it is today, and you should take full responsibility for your participation when you write this all up and you put it on the news and you have the only academic enterprise that we have that has its own section in the newspaper. Huh? Sports. The only thing that's got its own section in the newspaper from the university. Does the history department have a section in the newspaper? Hell no. No. Heck no. You know, you have a bad day at a lecture. Do they write you up? No, they don't write you up. You have a good day. Are you on the front page of the news? No, you're not. And who makes that possible? It is the people who want the sports enterprise to be the way it is. And so the miracle is that the universities and the NCAA have resisted as many of these pressures as they have, that they've been capable of sustaining this immense enterprise which has no counterpart anywhere else in the world and has managed to provide this huge base of support for higher education for so many years in a standardized, effective franchising system.
All right, I think we've had a highly competitive activity. A lot of points were put up on the board. Upon further review, I've decided to take the flag off the field, and the play will stand as conducted. Please thank our debaters.
Thank you.